For the first time, we're hearing an alibi from alleged murderer Bryan Kohberger, the man accused of killing 4 college students last November. Kohberger now says he was all alone the night of the murders, going for a late-night drive. With an alibi like that, experts say Kohberger himself may have to take the stand.
I think Kohberger has to testify to get the information exactly the way they want it in this motion.
28-year-old Kohberger is charged in the quadruple murder that shocked the nation when 4 University of Idaho students were found stabbed to death in their off-campus home on November 13th of last year. Investigators used DNA recovered from a knife sheath left at the crime scene to connect Kohberger to the case. In late December, he was arrested at his parents' home in Pennsylvania.
Detectives arrested 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, on a warrant for murders of Ethan, Zana, Madison, and Kaylee.
Surviving roommates of the victims later admitted to seeing a suspect in their home the night of the murders, describing the figure as, quote, 5'10" or taller, male, not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. Prosecutors allege Kohberger matches that description. After his extradition to Law County, Idaho, he was charged with all 4 murders.
Count 2 alleges that you committed the felony offense of murder in the first degree. It alleges that the defendant, Bryan C. Kohberger, on or about November 13, 2022, in Law County, state of Idaho, did willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice aforethought, kill and murder Madison Mogen, a human being, by stabbing Madison Mogen, from which she died.
This week, Kohberger's defense team unveiled his alibi, but it may have left more questions than answers.
The strange thing about this case, though, is Kohberger can't say specifically when and where he was at the time of the murders. He can only say that I was on one of these routine drives in a car. So it's kind of sort of an alibi, but kind of sort of not an alibi.
Law&Crime Network host and public defender Bryan Buckmeyer says it's common for prosecutors to request alibi information from the defense ahead of trial.
So in a lot of states, Idaho included, the defense is obligated to give what's called an alibi notice. It's if there is an alibi where a defendant can say, I was at this place and at this time when a crime occurred at this place and this time, and therefore it could not have been me. Either it's through the defendant's own words, oftentimes it's corroborated with this witness, or this video can explain why I was not there.
On July 27th, Law County prosecutors filed a motion to compel Kohberger's defense to provide the state with a notice of alibi. According to court documents, prosecutors were looking for a, quote, specific place or places at which the defendant claims to have been at the time of the burglary and homicides in the case, and the names and addresses of all witnesses upon whom the defendant intends to rely to establish such alibi. On August 2nd, Kohberger's defense filed an objection to the state's motion, shedding some light on what they say is his alibi. But according to Buckmeyer, some pieces are missing.
I would say it's like a 3-legged chair. Like, it's still a chair, but it's definitely missing like a very important piece to the point that it might wobble and fall apart. But you err on the side of, I'm the defense, I'm going to file this motion, because in some states they're very strict, and I think the defense hinted at this in their motion, that they do not want this information to be excluded because they did not present it within the statutory time that you're supposed to provide an alibi. So it's, again, it's kind of sort of is an alibi, but it doesn't have the specificity or that 4th leg of this is exactly where I was at this exact time and why I could not have committed this crime.
According to court documents, Kohberger, quote, has long had a habit of going for drives alone. The defense alleges that's what Kohberger was doing the night of the murders, but can't give much more information. The motion reads in part, quote, Mr. Kohberger is not claiming to be at a specific location at a specific time. At this time, there is not a specific witness to say precisely where Mr. Kohberger was at each moment of the hours between late night November 12, 2022 and early morning November 13, 2022.
And in my mind, knowing the rules of evidence, at best, you can get someone up on the stand to say, Yes, we looked at the cell phone history, and there seems to be a habit of these late night drives to X and Y location. Some are to the university where the 4 victims are, some are to other locations. But to specifically say you know why this person is doing this, that would be a speculation, and that's an objection.
Buckmeyer explains having someone else testify about Kohberger's whereabouts could get tricky when it comes time for trial.
Even if, let's say hypothetically, my wife sees me every day drive and leave the house at 9 a.m. and come back at 5 p.m. and I tell her I'm at work, she would have to testify based on the words that I say, and that would be hearsay.
Though Kohberger's defense says there's no one who could corroborate his alibi right now, court documents show Kohberger, quote, indicated he anticipates corroborating witnesses. The motion continues saying, quote, corroboration of Bryan Kohberger not being at 1122 King may be brought out through cross-examination of the state's witnesses. At this time, Mr. Kohberger cannot be more specific about the possible witnesses and exactly what they will say. But Buckmeyer says Kohberger's testimony may be the best way to corroborate the claim.
How would someone even seeing Kohberger drive off know what and why he's doing these solo rides? In my mind, I think Kohberger has to testify to get the information exactly the way they want it in this motion.
That being said, Buckmeyer says Kohberger's testimony isn't guaranteed.
And I think they're going to try their best to get this information in without Kohberger. But at best, in my mind, I think it'll be speculation. It'll again go back to experts saying his cell phone travels to and from locations at times that could not have been connected to this crime. But then the prosecution gets to come up and say, all right, maybe he's scouting other places. Maybe he's scouting where to dump bodies. Maybe he's scouting where to dump evidence. Maybe he's scouting to do whatever they can speculate at. And I think that pulls away from the defense's argument to say, hey, he's just a graduate student who needs some time to blow off steam and drive around. Because the only one who can for sure say that, if these are solo rides, in my mind, would be Kohberger.
The defense's use of this alibi isn't guaranteed either.
Just because you give notice that there is an alibi, it doesn't mean that this is 100% what you're going to say at trial. The defense has every right, because again, it's the prosecution's burden to put on the case. They have no burden to put on any evidence. They could come up to trial and simply say, Your Honor, we gave you notice of this alibi, but the prosecution couldn't even prove their case. So there's no reason for us to put on a case. We have no burden, but you definitely want to give notice so you're not excluded from using it in the future.
A lengthy preliminary hearing in Kohberger's case was scheduled for June, but those court dates were scrapped when the prosecution moved forward with grand jury proceedings. Kohberger's defense referenced this in their newly filed court documents, writing, quote, the defense has been hampered by the state's own choices. The state chose a secret grand jury rather than the planned preliminary hearing. Had the state moved forward with the preliminary hearing, the defense would have had the opportunity to develop testimony through cross-examination and witness presentation.
The defense, I think, is making the appropriate argument that the prosecution pulled that away from them. If the prosecution never said how they were going to go about this case and never said we're going to go towards preliminary hearing, as we all assumed was going to happen, the defense wouldn't have this argument.
As Kohberger's trial date looms, Buckmeyer says there are 2 important allegations the defense must work to combat: Kohberger's DNA on the knife sheath and information from the victim's roommate about a suspect seen the night of the murders.
With a defense, especially a defense like this, if you are perceiving that you're going to win, which every defense attorney who takes on a case should have that mindset, it's going to be a victory through 1,000 blows. So you take it one piece at a time. You say, all right, here's my alibi or my client's alibi. He was somewhere else. Then the other issue is the DNA on the sheath. And I think the other one would probably be the identification of these bushy eyebrows.
But Buckmeyer says the defense's case isn't hopeless.
I've always made the point of, I think many of us have been to college. You go to, especially what would be considered the party house. And after that, you'll be like, you find this person's sweater and this person's shoe and this person's wallet. Things get left at the party house all the time. And sometimes they're there just because someone picks it up in the surrounding area, thinks it's cool, and leaves it in the party house. Maybe that's how that sheath got there. Maybe it does belong to Bryan Kohberger, but it wasn't brought there by him. Maybe they can attack the DNA to say the DNA wasn't collected properly, cross-contamination, it's not him because they didn't analyze it correctly, whatever it may be. But I think that's another very large mountain they've got to climb to try to bring reasonable doubt to this case.
A not guilty plea was entered on Kohberger's behalf. Last month, a Latah County judge granted a 37-day stay of court proceedings. Right now, his trial is set to begin tentatively on October 2nd. Ahead of that, though, he's due back in court on August 18th. Reporting for Law&Crime Network, I'm Sierra Gillespie.